Get your things out of the main house, Uncle Lucius, because the first guests arrive tomorrow. That is what my nephew told me as he walked into the home I built with my own two hands without even knocking. He thought because I was 72 years old I was helpless. He thought because he had a piece of paper he had the power. He looked at my lakefront sanctuary and saw dollar signs, but he forgot one thing. I used to build bridges and tunnels for a living, and I know exactly where the structural weaknesses are. Before I tell you how I turned his dream investment into his worst nightmare, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful relative a harsh lesson about respect. It was 6 in the morning and the mist was just starting to lift off the surface of Lake Lanier. This was my time. The world was silent except for the gentle lap of water against the dock posts and the steam rising from my ceramic mug. It was Esther's favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim that I refused to throw away because her lips had touched it every morning for 40 years. I took a sip of the black coffee and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. I am Lucius Bennett, and at 72 years old I have learned that peace is the most expensive commodity on earth. I worked double shifts as a structural engineer in the Georgia heat laying asphalt and calculating load-bearing limits on bridges just to buy this plot of land. Back in 1980, a black man buying prime lakefront property in this county was not just difficult, it was an act of defiance. We had fought for every inch of this piece. Esther never got to enjoy the retirement we planned, but I felt her here in the morning, sitting in the empty rocking chair beside me, listening to the Cardinals sing. The silence was shattered not by a bird, but by the aggressive roar of an engine. I watched a bright red convertible tear down my gravel driveway, kicking up dust and stones, with zero regard for the landscaping I had tended to since the spring. The car skidded to a halt inches from my porch stairs. The engine cut and the silence returned, but it was different now. It was tense. My nephew Tyson stepped out of the driver's side. He was 32, wearing a linen suit that cost more than my first car and sunglasses that hid his eyes. He didn't look at me. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for a woman I had only seen in Instagram photos. Courtney. She was 28, blonde, and stepped onto my gravel driveway in stilettos, looking at my home as if she had just stepped in something unpleasant. They didn't say good morning. They didn't ask how my health was. They didn't even acknowledge that I was sitting 10 feet away from them. Courtney held an iPad up, blocking her view of the lake, and started walking toward the front door. "This facade is terrible," she said loudly, her voice grating against the morning calm. "We need to paint it white or maybe a soft gray. This rustic look is so dated, Tyson. It screams nursing home, not luxury retreat." Tyson followed her, nodding like a bobblehead doll. "I can get a crew out here by Tuesday, babe. We just need to clear the clutter first." They walked right past me. My own flesh and blood walked past me on my own porch as if I were a piece of lawn furniture. I set my coffee cup down slowly. The ceramic made a sharp click against the wood table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and steady, the voice I used to use when a foreman was about to make a catastrophic mistake on a construction site. "Is there a reason you are discussing painting my house without saying hello to the owner?" Tyson stopped and turned. He pulled his sunglasses down his nose and looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Oh, hey, Uncle Lucius. I didn't see you there in the shadows. We are on a tight schedule. Courtney has a vision and we need to capitalize on the summer rush." He turned back to the door and reached for the handle. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood to my full height of 6'2". "I haven't invited you inside, Tyson." "And who is this?" Courtney turned and looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on my flannel shirt and my worn work boots. She wrinkled her nose slightly. "I am his fiancée," she said, extending a hand that was limp and cold. "And we are here to maximize the potential of this asset. Tyson told me you were occupying the space, but we didn't realize there would be so much stuff." She gestured vaguely at my life. "My fishing rods by the door. The wind chimes Esther made. The potted ferns, stuff she called it." I looked at Tyson. "You have 5 seconds to explain why you are here disrespecting my home before I call the sheriff for trespassing." Tyson laughed, a short, dry sound. "Relax, Uncle Lucius. You can't trespass on your own property." I frowned. "My property." Tyson pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket. He tapped it against his palm. "You really need to check your email more often. I sent you the notice last week. I am turning this place into an Airbnb. I have already listed it. The first guests are booked for next weekend." I looked at him, trying to process the audacity. "This is my home, Tyson. I live here." "Not anymore," Tyson said, stepping closer. "Well, not in the main house anyway. Look, I know you are old and change is hard, but you are sitting on a gold mine and doing nothing with it. I am doing us both a favor. I am modernizing the portfolio." Courtney pushed past him and pushed my front door open. It wasn't locked because out here we didn't lock doors. She walked into my living room, the sanctuary where I had nursed Esther through her final days. I followed them inside, my blood starting to boil in a way I hadn't felt in years. "This wall needs to go," Courtney announced, pointing a manicured finger at the load-bearing wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. "We need an open concept, and that fireplace stone is hideous. We can cover it with shiplap. It needs to be boho chick Tyson. Think textures, think neutrals. Right now it smells like—" She sniffed the air theatrically. "It smells like Old Spice and mothballs. It smells like dust." "That smell is 40 years of hard work and memories," I said, stepping between her and the fireplace. "Get out! Both of you! Now!" Courtney rolled her eyes and looked at Tyson. "I told you he would be difficult. Handle it, Tyson. I am going to measure the bedrooms." She tried to step around me, but I blocked her path. "You are not going anywhere near my bedrooms." Tyson stepped forward, his face hardening. He wasn't the little boy I used to take fishing anymore. He was a desperate man masquerading as a success. "Uncle Lucius, stop being dramatic," he snapped. "You can't kick us out." "You know why? Because of this." He held up the document. I recognized the letterhead. It was a copy of my father's will from 30 years ago. "Granddad left this land to you and my dad equally, 50-50. When my dad died, his share passed to me. I own half of this cottage, Uncle Lucius. I have consulted with my lawyers. As a majority stakeholder, I have the right to monetize the asset. You can't stop me." I stared at the paper. I knew about the will. I knew his father, my younger brother Marcus, had been left a share. But I also knew something Tyson apparently didn't. However, I remained silent. I watched as Courtney walked over to my bookshelf and picked up a framed photo of Esther and me on our wedding day. She looked at it for a second, then placed it face down on the table. "We need to depersonalize the space," she said coldly. "Guests want to feel like it is their home, not like they are visiting their grandparents." Tyson smirked, seeing that I had gone quiet. "Look, we are not heartless. We have a solution for you." He pointed through the back window toward the garden shed I used for storing lawnmowers and tools. It was a small structure, barely 12 by 12, with a concrete floor and a single window. "We are going to clear out the shed, put a cot in there, maybe a hot plate. You can stay there when we have guests. It is private and you will be out of the way. When the house is empty, you can use the kitchen to cook your meals, but you have to be out by 10 a.m. when the cleaners come." The disrespect was physical. It felt like a slap. He wanted to move me from the home I built into a tool shed on my own land. He wanted me to hide like a servant while strangers slept in my bed and walked on my floors. "Be grateful we are including you at all," Courtney added, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Most people would just put you in a home. We are letting you stay on the property. Consider it charity." I looked at Tyson. He was avoiding my eyes now, focusing on a stain on the rug. "You are serious?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You want to put me in the shed?" "It is a guest cottage now," Uncle Lucius Tyson corrected. "And yes, I am serious. The income potential is $10,000 a month. I am not letting your sentimentality block my financial freedom. I have debts, Uncle, big ones, and this house is the only thing that is going to save me. So you can either cooperate and take the shed, or I can petition the court to force a sale of the entire property, and you will end up with nothing." I looked at the two of them. The arrogance, the greed, the absolute lack of humanity. I thought about the box of documents in my safe at the bank. I thought about the conversation I had with his father 20 years ago, and I thought about the promise I made to Esther that I would never let anyone take this home from us. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my home one last time before it was tainted by their perfume and ambition. I didn't scream, I didn't fight, I didn't tell him he was wrong, I simply nodded slowly. I learned a long time ago that when an enemy is making a fatal mistake, you don't interrupt them. You let them walk right off the cliff. "All right, Tyson," I said, "if that is how it has to be." Courtney clapped her hands together, a sharp, violent sound in the quiet room. "Finally. Okay, let's get to work. Tyson, grab those boxes. We need to clear these shelves. All of this junk has to go. She pointed to my collection of vintage jazz records, vinyls I had collected since I was 19, original pressings of Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Put them in the trash, Tyson. Nobody listens to this garbage anymore. We need space for the succulent display. I watched Tyson grab a stack of my records, my history. He looked at me, challenging me to stop him. I didn't move. I turned around and walked out the back door toward the shed. I could hear them laughing as I closed the door. They thought they had won. They thought I was a broken old man accepting his fate. But as I walked across the grass, I wasn't thinking about sleeping in the shed. I was reaching for my phone to call Mr. Wallace, my lawyer. Tyson had started a war, but he had forgotten to check if his opponent was actually unarmed. He wanted to play the ownership game. Fine, we would play. But he was about to learn that in the real world, you cannot build a future on a foundation of lies, especially when the ground you are standing on doesn't belong to you. I climbed into my 1995 Ford F-150, the only vehicle I had ever trusted as much as my own 2 feet. The engine sputtered to life, a familiar groan that mirrored the ache in my joints, but it ran true just like me. As I pulled out onto the main road, leaving the dust cloud of Tyson's arrival behind, I didn't look back at the cottage. Looking back was for people who had something to lose. I was driving toward the only thing that could save it, the truth buried in a filing cabinet 20 miles away. The drive to downtown Gainesville took 30 minutes, enough time for the anger to cool into a hard resolve. I wasn't going to let my brother's son dismantle my life, not without a fight. Mr. Wallace's office was tucked between a bakery and a barber shop, a relic of a time when a handshake meant something. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The air smelled of old paper and peppermint. Mr. Wallace looked up from his desk, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only man alive who knew exactly what happened between me and my brother Marcus 20 years ago. "Lucius," he said, his voice raspy, "you look like a man who is about to dig a trench." I sat down heavily in the leather chair opposite him. "Worse," I said. "Tyson is back, and he thinks he owns half my house." Mr. Wallace sighed, removing his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief. I wondered when this day would come. "He thinks the will is still valid, doesn't he?" I nodded. He waved it in my face like a golden ticket. "He doesn't know about the deal Marcus and I made." Mr. Wallace stood up and walked over to a wall of filing cabinets. He pulled open a drawer labeled B, his fingers dancing over the tabs until he pulled out a thick manila folder. The dust on it was a testament to the secrets we had kept. "You paid off Marcus's gambling debts, Lucius. $50,000 back in 2002. That was every dime you had saved for your retirement, and in exchange he signed over his half of the property to you, a full quitclaim deed, notarized, legal." He placed the folder on the desk between us. I stared at it. I remembered the night Marcus came to me crying, saying the loan sharks were going to break his legs. I remembered Esther's face when I told her we had to empty our savings. She didn't hesitate. "Family is family," she had said. "But we never filed the deed at the courthouse," I said quietly. "Marcus begged me not to. He said if people found out he had sold his birthright, he would be ruined. He wanted to keep his dignity. So I put the deed in your safe and let everyone believe he still owned a share. I did it to protect his pride. And now his son is using that kindness as a weapon against me." Mr. Wallace tapped the folder. "We can file this today, Lucius. Walk it right over to the clerk of courts. Once it is recorded, Tyson doesn't have a leg to stand on. He will be trespassing on your sole property." I reached out and touched the folder, feeling the weight of the decision. If I file this now, I expose Marcus as a man who sold out his family for a poker game. I destroy his memory. Tyson will know his father was a failure. But if I don't file it, Tyson destroys my home. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Tyson. I swiped to answer, putting it on speaker so Mr. Wallace could hear. "Uncle Lucius, where did you go? You are supposed to be moving your junk to the shed. The cleaners are coming at noon." I didn't answer. I just listened to the entitlement in his voice. Silence on the line, then a sigh of irritation. "Look, Uncle, I am trying to be nice here. But my lawyer says if you continue to obstruct the business operations of a jointly owned asset, I can sue you for damages. I can sue you for back rent for the 20 years you lived there alone. Do you have $50,000 lying around, Uncle? Because that is what you would owe me." I looked at Mr. Wallace. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "Sue me," I said calmly. "See how far that gets you." Tyson laughed a cruel sound. "Oh, I will. And Uncle, just so you know, I have already accepted a booking deposit, $50,000, for a 3-day music festival next month. The contract is signed. The money is in my account. If you mess this up, I will be liable for breach of contract, and I will make sure every penny of that comes out of your hide. I will take your pension. I will take your truck. I will leave you with nothing." He hung up. The silence in the office was deafening. $50,000. He had taken a deposit for a music festival, on residential land, without a permit, without insurance. He was insane. Or desperate. Or both. Mr. Wallace leaned forward. "Lucius, he just admitted to fraud and operating an illegal business on your property. If we file this deed now, not only do you stop him, but he will be on the hook for that $50,000. He will likely go to jail. Is that what you want?" I thought about the little boy I used to take fishing. The boy who used to call me Uncle Lou and ask me to fix his toy trucks. But then I thought about Courtney calling my home a nursing home. I thought about Tyson threatening to take my pension. I stood up. "Not yet," I said. "Don't file it yet. Keep it ready. If I play this card now, he just walks away angry. He needs to learn a lesson. He needs to feel what it is like to lose everything because of greed. I am going back to the cottage. Let him think he has won. Let him dig the hole a little deeper." I drove back to the cottage, my mind racing. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Courtney standing on the porch holding her phone up on a tripod. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a flowing white dress, looking like she owned the place. I parked the truck and sat for a moment watching her. She was talking to the phone, her smile bright and fake, her hands gesturing wildly. I rolled down my window to hear, "Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to finally give you a tour of our new family estate." She spun around, showing off the lake view. This has been in Tyson's family for generations, but honestly it was totally neglected until we took over. We are going to transform this place into the ultimate wellness retreat. Yoga on the dock, green juice in the kitchen. It is going to be a vibe. She walked closer to the window where I had parked my truck, oblivious to my presence. "And don't worry about security. We have a live-in groundskeeper." She pointed the camera at me just as I stepped out of the truck. "Say hi to Uncle Lucius, guys. He is a little camera shy and honestly a bit senile, but he is harmless. We are letting him stay in the garden shed out back because we are just big softies like that. Family first, right?" I froze. Alive and groundskeeper. Senile. She was broadcasting this to the world, turning me into a prop in her vanity project. I saw the comments popping up on her screen, hearts and smiling faces, people praising her generosity. She looked at me and winked a conspiratorial wink as if we were in on the joke together. "Go on, Uncle Lucius, head to the shed. I need to film the entryway now." I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I just walked past her, my boots crunching on the gravel. I walked toward the shed, my head held high. She thought she was building a brand. She didn't realize she was documenting a crime scene. Every lie she told, every video she posted was just more evidence for the file Mr. Wallace was holding. I opened the door to the shed and stepped into the darkness. It smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. It was hot and cramped. But as I sat on a stack of old tires, I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. The deed was in the safe. The trap was set, and they had just walked right into it, smiling for the camera the whole time. Monday morning brought the sound of destruction, not construction. I woke up in the main bedroom for what I knew was likely the last time, to the violent thud of sledgehammers against plaster. I threw on my robe and rushed into the living room. Dust hung in the air like a thick fog coating the furniture I had built by hand. 3 men in dirty overalls were swinging hammers at the wall separating the kitchen from the living area. It was the load-bearing wall I had specifically reinforced back in '85 to support the second-story addition. Tyson stood in the center of the chaos, holding a coffee cup, looking like a general surveying a battlefield he did not understand. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice booming over the noise. "Stop right now!" The workers hesitated, looking from me to Tyson. One of them lowered his hammer. Tyson rolled his eyes and sighed loud enough to be heard over the falling debris. "Keep working, guys," he commanded. "Ignore him." He turned to me with a smirk. "It is called an open concept, Uncle. Look it up. It adds value. You are removing a structural support, I said, stepping over a pile of broken drywall. If you take out those studs, the roof will sag within 6 months. I am a structural engineer, Tyson. I know the load limits of this frame. Tyson laughed, shaking his head. You were an engineer 30 years ago, old man. Technology has changed. I watched a tutorial. It is fine. Besides, these guys are pros. I looked at the workers. They were day laborers, unsupervised, without a permit in sight. They looked nervous, but they needed the paycheck, so they raised their hammers again. I was about to grab Tyson by his expensive lapels when I saw something out of the corner of my eye that stopped my heart cold. Through the large bay window, I saw Courtney on the back deck. She was holding a stack of square cardboard sleeves, my vinyls. She walked to the edge of the railing and tossed them over. They fluttered down like wounded birds landing in the tall, wet grass of the backyard. My breath caught in my throat. Those were not just records. They were first pressings of Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, and Sarah Vaughan. I had spent weekends hunting for them in dusty record shops in Atlanta when I was a young man. Esther and I had danced to those exact records on our first anniversary. I forgot about the wall. I forgot about the roof. I ran to the back door, tearing it open and sprinting barefoot across the deck. Courtney was reaching into a box for another stack. No, I roared, lunging forward. Don't you dare touch those! Courtney jumped, dropping a copy of Kind of Blue onto the wet deck. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that quickly narrowed into annoyance. Oh my God, you scared me, she snapped. Why are you screaming? I am just decluttering. I scrambled down the stairs to the grass, falling to my knees. The sky was gray and a light drizzle had started to fall. I frantically gathered the records, wiping the moisture from the covers with the sleeve of my robe. Some of the jackets were bent from the fall. I clutched them to my chest, trying to shield them from the rain. These are rare, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. These are history. You are throwing away history. Courtney leaned over the railing, looking down at me with a look of pure disgust. It is just old junk, Lucius. Look at the covers. They are faded and smell like a basement. We need this corner for the chill zone. She pointed to the spot where my record player used to sit. I ordered a hanging egg chair and a neon sign that says "Good Vibes Only." It is going to be the main Instagram spot for the guests. Nobody wants to listen to that scratching noise. We have a Bluetooth speaker. That is what people want. I looked up at her standing there in her designer athleisure wear, dismissing 70 years of black culture and artistry as junk. She didn't see the genius of Coltrane. She didn't see the struggle and the triumph in those notes. She only saw an aesthetic that didn't match her beige vision. She saw my life as clutter to be swept away. You have no idea what you are doing, I said quietly. You are erasing the soul of this house. Courtney laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Soul doesn't pay the mortgage, she said. Vibes do. And frankly, your vibe is depressing. It is too dark, too heavy. We want light and airy. So please just take your trash to the shed or the dump. I don't care which. Just get it out of my sight. Tyson walked out onto the deck, joining her. He looked down at me, kneeling in the grass, holding my records like a beggar. See, Courtney said, pointing at me. This is what I have to deal with. He is hoarding garbage. Tyson shook his head. Uncle Lucius, stop embarrassing yourself. Get up. You look pathetic. We are doing you a favor, increasing the property value, and you are crying over old plastic. Just move it to the shed. And hurry up. The painters are coming in an hour, and I don't want you in the way. I looked at them standing there side by side. The arrogance. The ignorance. The absolute lack of respect for anything that came before them. I felt the cold rain soaking into my knees. I looked down at the record in my hands. It was John Coltrane, A Love Supreme, Esther's favorite. I wiped a raindrop from the cover. In that moment, the fire in my belly turned into ice. Screaming at them wouldn't work. Fighting them physically wouldn't work. They were immune to reason and shame. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the engineer again, calculating the stress points, waiting for the collapse. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking. I gathered the rest of the records into my arms. I didn't look angry anymore. I let my face go slack. I let my shoulders slump. I became the defeated old man they wanted to see. You are right, I said, my voice flat and hollow. I am just an old man holding on to the past. I shouldn't be in the way of progress. Courtney smiled, a victorious smirk. Exactly. I am glad you finally get it. It is for the best, really. You will be more comfortable in the shed. Smaller space, less to clean. I nodded slowly. Yes. The shed. I will go there now. I turned my back on them and began the long walk across the wet lawn to the garden shed. I could hear them congratulating each other behind me. They thought they had broken me. They thought I had surrendered. But as I walked, I wasn't thinking about defeat. I was thinking about the load-bearing wall they were destroying. I was thinking about the zoning laws for commercial noise. And I was thinking about the can of industrial paint thinner I had stored in the back of that shed. I opened the shed door and stepped into the gloom. It smelled of earth and oil. I placed the records gently on a workbench, covering them with a dry tarp. Then I turned and looked back at the house. My house. They were tearing it apart piece by piece. But they didn't know that I still held the blueprints. I wiped the rain from my face and it felt like war paint. "Fine," I whispered to the darkness. "You want the shed. I will take the shed. But when the roof comes down, do not come crying to me." I sat on an overturned bucket and watched the house through the small, dirty window. My eyes were cold. My heart was steady. The siege had begun, and I was ready to wait them out. The shed was a suffocating box of stagnant air and humiliation. I lay on the narrow military cot I had dragged out from behind the lawnmower, listening to the hum of the mosquito zapper and the distant thud of bass music coming from my own living room. The air smelled of gasoline fertilizer and the damp rot of old wood. It was 90 degrees in there, even with the door cracked open. My back ached from the lack of support, and my knees throbbed from the dampness seeping up through the concrete floor. This was where my nephew thought I belonged, among the rusted tools and the spiders. He thought he had discarded me like a broken wrench, but he didn't know that this shed was also my archive. I couldn't sleep. The anger was a hot coal in my chest, keeping me awake, keeping me focused. I sat up and pulled the string of the single bare bulb hanging from the rafters. The yellow light flickered, illuminating the stacks of banker boxes lining the back wall. These boxes held 40 years of receipts, blueprints, and correspondence. Tyson saw trash. I saw ammunition. I pulled the first box down. It was heavy, filled with the weight of my history. I started sifting through the papers. My hands, which had poured the foundation of that house, were now digging through its paper soul. I was looking for something specific. Something I remembered from 1982 when the county was trying to rezone the lakefront to keep people like me out. They had thrown 1,000 regulations at me, hoping I would give up and sell. I hadn't given up then, and I wasn't giving up now. I read through property tax assessments, water quality reports, and survey maps. My eyes strained in the dim light, but I didn't stop. I read every line, every fine print clause. I was looking for the silver bullet that would stop Tyson's heart. Outside, the party was getting louder. I heard glass breaking, followed by raucous laughter. It was the sound of disrespect echoing across the water. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with a rag and kept reading. I found a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency from '95. Interesting, but not enough. I found the original septic tank permit. Better. The system was rated for a 2-bedroom residential home, not a commercial hotel. But I needed something stronger. I needed a nuclear option. I pushed the box aside and grabbed another labeled County Planning 1980 to 1990. I blew the dust off the lid. The door to the shed banged open, startling me. I quickly threw a tarp over the open box. It was Courtney. She was holding an empty silver ice bucket and swaying slightly. She reeked of expensive white wine and condescension. "Hey, old man," she slurred. "We are out of ice. Run up to the gas station and get 3 bags. And hurry. The guests are complaining about warm drinks." I looked at her standing in the doorway of my tool shed, demanding servitude. She didn't see a man. She saw a utility, a resource to be exploited. I stood up slowly. I could have told her to go to hell. I could have told her I wasn't her servant. But I needed to see what was happening in that house. I needed intel. "I will get the ice," I said quietly, "but I need the keys to the truck." She tossed them at me and they landed in the dirt. I picked them up without a word. I walked past her toward the house, supposedly to get cash from my wallet, but really to observe. The scene that greeted me was a violation. My living room was packed with strangers. People I had never met were sitting on my furniture with their feet on the coffee table. Someone had spilled red wine on the rug Esther had braided. The air was thick with vape smoke and loud, performative laughter. Tyson was in the kitchen holding court with a group of men who looked just like him, soft hands and hard eyes. I walked into the kitchen, keeping my head down, playing the role of the beaten uncle. Tyson didn't even look at me. He was too busy bragging. "Yeah, we are completely booked for the next 3 months, he was saying, his voice booming. "Cash only for the first few weeks, though. I haven't exactly set up the tax ID yet. You know how it is. Gotta keep the overhead low until the revenue stream stabilizes. One of his friends laughed. Smart move. What about permits? The county can be a pain about commercial zoning on the lake. Tyson waved his hand dismissively. Please, who is going to check? We are way out here. By the time they figure it out, I will have made enough to pay any fine they throw at me. Besides, the inspector is probably some underpaid nobody. I can handle it. I froze by the refrigerator, my hand on the handle. He had just admitted to tax evasion and operating without a permit in front of witnesses. He was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the rules didn't apply to him because he had a vision. I grabbed a bottle of water, acting as if I hadn't heard a thing. Tyson finally noticed me. Oh, hey, uncle, grab a rag and wipe up that spill in the living room on your way out, and make sure you use the back door. We don't want to kill the vibe. I nodded, muttering a yes, sir, that tasted like bile. I wiped the wine stain, my heart breaking for the disrespect to Esther's memory, but my mind racing with the new information. He was operating illegally. He was vulnerable. I walked out the back door, the bass thumping against my spine. I didn't go to the gas station. I drove the truck around the block and parked it out of sight, then walked back to the shed through the woods. They were too drunk to notice the ice never came. Back in the safety of the shed, I pulled the tarp off the box. I was energized now. Tyson's arrogance had given me a direction. Zoning, permits, restrictions. I dug deeper into the box labeled County Planning. My fingers brushed against a thick roll of paper at the bottom. It was wrapped in a rubber band that snapped as soon as I touched it. I unrolled the document on the concrete floor, holding the corners down with a hammer and a wrench. It was a large blue and white map, the original survey of the lakefront from 1984. I traced the property lines with my calloused finger. There was my plot. Lot 42. And there, running right through the middle of the property, was a thick red line I had completely forgotten about. Attached to the map was a stapled document titled Lakefront Buffer Conservation Regulation Subsection C. I began to read the text, my eyes widening with every sentence. The document stated clearly that any property located within 100 feet of the high water mark was designated as a protected ecological buffer zone. It strictly prohibited any commercial activity, commercial gatherings, or structural modifications that increased the occupancy load beyond a single-family dwelling. It was a restrictive covenant signed by the county and the original landowners to protect the lake's water quality. And right there at the bottom was my signature, and Marcus's signature. I sat back on my heels, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't just a rule. It was a deed restriction attached to the land itself. It didn't matter if Tyson thought he owned half the house. He couldn't run a business here. He couldn't hold a festival here. He couldn't even rent a room here without violating a federal environmental protection statute. The penalty for violation wasn't just a fine. It was the immediate revocation of the certificate of occupancy. That meant the house would be condemned until it was returned to its original state. I looked at the document and then at the house where the party was raging. Tyson thought he was a disruptor. He thought he was a genius. But he was partying on protected land. He was selling tickets to a federal crime scene. I rolled up the map, carefully treating it like the holy scripture it was. I wasn't going to call the police yet. That would be too easy. I was going to let him invest every penny he had. I was going to let him invite the world to his grand opening. And then when he had nothing left to lose but his pride, I was going to pull the ground out from under him literally. I turned off the light and lay back on the cot. The music didn't bother me anymore. It sounded like a funeral march, and they were the only ones who didn't know they were walking toward the grave. The sound of a reciprocating saw tearing through aged pine is a scream that only a builder truly understands. It is the sound of history being severed. I stood in the doorway of what used to be the master bedroom, watching sawdust rain down like snow. Tyson was pointing at the exposed ceiling joists, shouting over the noise of the power tools. "Cut it there," he yelled at a confused-looking laborer. "We need to frame out 2 micro-bedrooms here. We are losing revenue if we only have 3 beds. We need 5. Maximizing occupancy per square foot is the only way this math works." I stepped into the room, my boots crunching on 50 years of drywall dust. "Tyson," I said, my voice cutting through the mechanical whine, "that is a double LVL beam. It is carrying the entire load of the roof valley. If you cut into that span without installing a vertical support post, the ridgeline is going to snap in the first heavy windstorm. I know this because I calculated the shear strength myself in 1985. I poured the footer that holds it up. You are about to collapse the roof on your guests' heads." Tyson signaled the worker to cut the power. The saw whined down into silence. He turned to me, wiping dust from his expensive designer t-shirt. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation, the way one looks at a child who has interrupted a serious conversation. "Uncle Lucius," he said, sighing, "I appreciate your concern, really, but building codes have changed since you were mixing cement in the Dark Ages. We are using lightweight materials now. Modern architecture is about flow, not just heavy beams. I watched a whole series on structural hacking on YouTube. It is fine. Besides, we are not building a bridge here. It is just a house. Relax, just a house." To him, it was plywood and sheetrock. To me, it was a living, breathing organism that I had birthed from the red Georgia clay. I walked over to the beam and slapped it with my open palm. "This is a 24-foot span, Tyson," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Gravity does not care about your YouTube tutorial. Physics does not care about your revenue stream. If you cut this, you kill this house." Tyson stepped into my personal space chest to chest. He was taller than me, but he stood with the slouch of a man who had never carried anything heavier than a laptop. "Listen, old man," he hissed. "I am in charge here. I am the one taking the risk. I am the one with the vision. You are just a retired asphalt layer who got lucky buying cheap land before it was valuable. You don't know anything about modern luxury or maximizing space. So go back to your shed and let the professionals work. Or better yet, grab a broom and make yourself useful." He turned back to the worker and clapped his hands. "Cut it." "Don't listen to him. Just cut it." I watched the worker hesitate, then shrug and pull the trigger on the saw. The blade bit into the wood, screaming as it chewed through the fibers of my home's backbone. I felt a phantom pain in my own spine. Tyson smirked at me over his shoulder, challenging me to stop him. I didn't. I backed out of the room slowly. Let him cut it. Let him weaken the structure. When the inspectors came, and they would come, they would see a compromise so dangerous it would mandate an immediate condemnation order. He was literally destroying his own investment, and he was too arrogant to see it. I retreated to the kitchen, which was now a staging area for their renovation madness. Boxes of cheap flat-pack furniture were stacked to the ceiling. Courtney was there unpacking linens. She looked up as I entered, and her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Oh, Lucius, perfect timing," she said. "I have something for you." She reached into a box and pulled out a garment wrapped in plastic. She held it up against her body, measuring it with her eyes. It was a white jacket with gold buttons and a pair of black trousers. It looked like something a staff member would wear at a colonial-themed resort or a bad movie about the antebellum South. It was a costume, a caricature. "We thought it would be a nice touch," she said, smoothing the polyester fabric. "Since you are going to be around anyway, you might as well look the part. Guests love that authentic local flavor. Having a resident butler adds a layer of prestige. It makes the property feel established, like old money." I stared at the jacket. My hands, which had designed highway interchanges and suspension systems, curled into fists at my sides. She wanted to dress me up. She wanted to turn the owner of the house into a servant to sell a fantasy of wealth to strangers. She wanted to strip away my dignity along with my ownership. "You want me to wear that?" I asked, my voice flat. "Yes," Courtney said, oblivious to the insult. "And we need you to be available for basic tasks. Greeting guests, carrying luggage, maybe serving drinks on the deck at sunset. Nothing too strenuous, just presence. We will put it in the listing description. On-site, concierge service included. It justifies the higher nightly rate. Plus, it gives you something to do besides lurking in that shed. You want to contribute to the family success, don't you?" I looked at the cheap fabric swinging from her manicured fingers. I looked at her face, expectant and entitled. A refusal was on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to tell her exactly where she could shove that jacket. I wanted to tear it into shreds. But then I stopped. I thought about the plan. I thought about the long game. If I was just the angry uncle in the shed, I was an outsider. I was blind. But if I was the butler, if I was the invisible servant, I would be in every room. I would hear every conversation. I would have a key to every door. I would be the ghost in the machine. I unclenched my fists. I let the anger drain out of my face, replacing it with a mask of defeated resignation. I reached out and took the jacket. The plastic crinkled in my grip. You are right, Courtney, I said, lowering my head. I should contribute. I am just a burden otherwise. I will wear it. She clapped her hands, delighted. Oh, that is wonderful, Lucius. You look so much better when you cooperate. Go put it on. I want to see if it fits. I turned and walked toward the bathroom carrying the symbol of my humiliation. But as I closed the door and looked at myself in the mirror, the defeated old man vanished. My eyes were sharp. My jaw was set. I stripped off my flannel shirt and put on the white jacket. It was tight in the shoulders, but it fit. I buttoned the gold buttons one by one. Each button was a promise that I would watch, a promise that I would listen, a promise that I would serve them exactly what they deserved. I straightened the collar and looked at my reflection. I wasn't Lucius Bennett, the engineer, anymore. I was the help, and the help sees everything. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I will serve you, I thought, as I walked toward them, my footsteps silent on the floor I built. I will serve you right up until the moment I serve you your eviction notice. I will be the best butler you ever had, and the last one you will ever see. The drive to the diner on the outskirts of town was the first time I had breathed easy in days. I told Tyson I was going to the hardware store to buy more paint for his ridiculous fence project, but instead I sat in a vinyl booth opposite a man named Mr. Henderson. Henderson was the regional director of the Nature Conservancy, a man with dirt under his fingernails and a passion for wetlands that matched my own. I had called him 2 days ago, and when I told him I controlled Lot 42 on the lakefront, he had cleared his schedule immediately. He knew the ecological value of my land better than anyone. It was the last untouched buffer zone on the eastern shore, a critical filter for the lake's water table. I laid the survey map on the table between us, pushing aside the salt and pepper shakers. I am prepared to offer you a conservation easement, I said, keeping my voice low. A perpetual binding agreement. I want to donate the development rights of my property to your trust. The land remains in my name, but the usage rights transfer to you. No commercial activity, no subdivision, no new structures, just the existing cottage and the woods forever. Henderson looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his eyes widening. Lucius, do you understand the value of what you are giving away? That land is zoned for potential high-density residential. Developers have been eyeing it for a decade. You are walking away from millions of dollars in potential equity. If you sign this, the property value drops by 80% overnight because it can never be developed. I took a sip of my coffee. I don't care about the equity, I said. I care about the legacy. I want a life estate clause included. I maintain the right to live in the residence until my death. After that, the house is demolished and the land returns to nature. But effective immediately upon signing, the land is designated as a protected habitat. That means no hotels, no resorts, and absolutely no short-term rentals. Can you draft that? Henderson nodded slowly, pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. We can draft that. We have been trying to protect that shoreline for 20 years. This is a gift to the state, Lucius. But are you sure? Once this is filed with the county clerk, it stays with the deed forever. Future owners, even your heirs, cannot undo it. It takes an act of Congress to break a conservation easement. I smiled a thin, cold smile. That is exactly what I am counting on. My heirs are the reason I am sitting here. Draw it up, Mr. Henderson. Make it ironclad. I want the restrictions to be so tight that you can't even park a commercial vehicle on the grass without a permit. I want the ink dry by this afternoon. I returned to the cottage just as the sun was hitting its peak. The humidity was rising, and so was the tension. I parked the truck near the shed and was about to head inside to change back into my degrading butler uniform when I heard a voice coming from the back deck. It was Tyson. He was pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't using his influencer voice. He wasn't projecting success. He sounded terrified. I stopped behind the large oak tree near the shed and listened. Please, you have to give me 2 more weeks, Tyson was pleading, his voice cracking. The launch is this weekend. We have influencers coming. The cash flow starts Monday. I swear I can have the first 50,000 to you by Wednesday. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Tyson's face drained of color. He looked sick. No, please don't send anyone to the house, he whispered violently. My fiancé is here. My uncle is here. Listen, I know I owe you 200,000. I know the interest is compounding. But this property is the collateral. It is worth $1 million easy. If I don't pay, you can take the house. Just don't hurt me." I stood frozen in the shadow of the oak tree. $200,000. He wasn't just in debt, he was in deep with loan sharks. People who didn't file lawsuits but broke kneecaps. That explained the desperation. That explained the rush. He wasn't trying to build a business empire, he was trying to save his own life. He had promised them my house as collateral. He had gambled with my legacy to pay for his mistakes. Tyson hung up the phone and leaned over the railing, heaving dry sobs. He looked small and pathetic, a boy playing a man's game and losing. For a second, a brief, fleeting second, I felt pity for him. He was drowning. But then I looked at the wall he had destroyed. I looked at the shed he had forced me into. I remembered the way he looked at me when he told me I was nothing but a squatter in my own home. He had brought this storm on himself. He had chosen to try and steal my life instead of asking for help. If he had come to me 6 months ago and told me the truth, I might have helped him. I might have taken out a mortgage to clear his debt, but he chose betrayal. He chose theft, and now he was going to pay the price. I stepped back silently, retreating into the shed before he could see me. I sat on my cot and waited for the text from Henderson. Tyson was banking on the house saving him. He was promising it to dangerous men. But he didn't know that the asset he was leveraging was about to become worthless. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Henderson. "The documents are ready at Mr. Wallace's office." I slipped out again, telling Courtney I needed to buy specialized polish for the silverware. I drove to the law office with a sense of finality. Mr. Wallace and Mr. Henderson were waiting. The document was thick-heavy with legal jargon and stamps. Conservation easement deed. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I thought of Esther and how she loved the herons that nested in the reeds. I thought of the peace we had built. And I thought of Tyson promising my home to thugs. I signed my name, Lucius Bennett, in bold black ink. Mr. Wallace notarized it immediately. Henderson signed for the trust. "It is done," Henderson said, shaking my hand. "I will file this electronically with the county right now. As of 5 o'clock today, Lot 42 is a protected nature preserve. Commercial operation is a federal offense." I walked out of the office and into the warm Georgia evening. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweeter. I drove back to the cottage, feeling the weight of the secret in my pocket. Tyson was sitting on the porch drinking a beer, looking out at the lake he thought was his salvation. He waved at me dismissively, pointing to the kitchen. "Get inside and polish that silver Lucius. The VIPs arrive tomorrow." I walked past him, my head bowed in fake submission. "Yes, sir," I said. "I will get right on that." I went into the kitchen and started polishing spoons, watching him through the window. He was calculating his profits. He was counting money he would never see. He didn't know that he was no longer standing on prime real estate. He was standing on a nature preserve, and he was the invasive species that was about to be removed. I wiped the sweat from my eyes with the back of my hand and looked at the 300 feet of split rail fence that lined the perimeter of my property. The Georgia sun was beating down with a humidity that felt like a wet wool blanket, and Tyson was standing in the shade of the porch sipping an iced latte. "Uncle Lucius," he shouted, pointing a manicured finger toward the far post. "You missed a spot near the bottom. I need this pristine white by sundown. The influencers are arriving at 10 a.m. tomorrow and the aesthetic has to be crisp. White fences pop on Instagram." I dipped my brush into the 5-gallon bucket. My shoulders screamed in protest. I was 72 years old, and I had spent the last 6 hours painting my own fence like a hired day laborer while my nephew watched. But I didn't complain. I didn't throw down the brush, because this paint bucket contained more than just exterior latex. Earlier that morning, when Tyson sent me to the hardware store, I had made a detour to a farm supply shop on the edge of town. I bought the high-grade white paint he asked for, but I also bought 2 gallons of concentrated fish emulsion fertilizer and a bag of sulfur powder. It was an old trick my grandfather used to keep deer away from his vegetable garden. When dry, it was odorless and invisible. But when exposed to high humidity or rain, the chemical bonds broke down and released a stench that could peel paint off a wall. It smelled like rotting snapper mixed with a sewer leak. I had mixed the ratio perfectly behind the shed while Tyson was on a Zoom call. Now as I applied the final coat, the paint looked bright, clean, and innocent. I walked over to the section Tyson had pointed out and slapped a thick layer onto the wood. "It is done, Tyson," I said, my voice raspy from dehydration. "The entire perimeter is sealed." Tyson walked over and inspected my work. He ran a finger along the top rail. "Not bad, old man. I guess you are good for something other than taking up space. It looks expensive. That is what matters." I looked at the fence gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It is definitely going to leave an impression," I said. I capped the paint can tight. The heat was rising and I could feel the air pressure dropping. The weatherman had called for a heavy storm front moving in overnight. Perfect conditions. The moisture would activate the emulsion just as his guests were settling in for their first night of luxury. Tyson turned back to the house. "Clean up the brushes and hide those drop cloths. I don't want any evidence of manual labor when the guests arrive. We want them to think this place just magically exists in perfection." I cleaned the brushes at the hose bib, watching the white water run into the grass. My stomach growled loud enough to be heard over the running water. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I walked into the kitchen, my body aching, hoping to make a simple meal. I pulled a cast-iron skillet from the cabinet and a package of spicy andouille sausage from the fridge. I needed something savory, something with heat to settle my nerves. I started slicing the sausage and threw it into the pan with some onions and bell peppers. The aroma of garlic and paprika filled the air, a smell that had defined this kitchen for 40 years. It was the smell of comfort. It was the smell of home. The back door flew open and Courtney stormed in. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening in horror as she sniffed the air. "Oh my God, Lucius, what is that stench?" She rushed over to the stove and turned off the burner without asking. "Are you insane? We have VIPs coming in less than 12 hours. We are doing a sage and lavender cleanse to purify the space. We cannot have the house smelling like cheap grease and poverty." I stared at her, my hand still holding the wooden spoon. "I am cooking dinner, Courtney. I worked all day on that fence. I am hungry." Courtney grabbed the handle of my skillet. The sausage was just starting to brown. The onions were translucent and sweet. She walked to the trash can and dumped the entire contents inside. The sizzle of the hot grease hitting the plastic liner sounded like an insult. "Absolutely not," she said, slamming the trash lid. "This is a wellness retreat, not a roadside diner. The scent profile needs to be neutral and calming. You are ruining the brand. If you are hungry, eat a sandwich." She pointed to a loaf of generic white bread and a package of budget bologna sitting on the counter. "And eat it outside. I don't want crumbs on the quartz countertops. I just had them polished." I looked at the empty stove. I looked at the trash can where my dinner lay ruined. Then I looked at the bologna. It was the food of my childhood struggles, the food I ate when I had nothing. Now in the home I owned free and clear, I was being forced to eat it like an unwanted dog. The disrespect was so absolute it was almost breathtaking. I could have grabbed her. I could have thrown her out right then. But the deed from Mr. Henderson was burning a hole in my pocket. The trap was already sprung, they just didn't know it yet. I took the bread and the meat. I didn't say a word. I walked out the back door and sat on the steps of the shed. I ate the cold sandwich, slowly chewing every bite, swallowing my pride with the processed meat. As I ate, I watched the sky turn a bruised purple over the lake. The wind was picking up, whipping the leaves of the oak trees upside down. The storm was coming. Tyson came out onto the deck an hour later. He was holding a glass of champagne. He looked down at me sitting by the shed. "Uncle," he called out, "change of plans. We need the shed for storage. The guests are bringing a lot of gear, paddle boards, bikes, that kind of thing. There isn't room for you." I stood up, wiping crumbs from my pants. "Where am I supposed to go, Tyson?" Tyson shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "I don't know. A motel. There is a Motel 6 out on the highway. It is cheap. Here." He reached into his pocket and crumpled up a $50 bill, tossing it down to me. It fluttered in the wind and landed in the dirt near my boot. "Take a vacation, Uncle. Get out of our hair for a few days. Don't come back until Monday. We need the property exclusively for the guests." I bent down and picked up the $50. It was dirty now, stained by the soil of my land. I looked at it and then at Tyson. "You are kicking me off my own land, Tyson." "For $50. Tyson laughed. "It is not your land anymore, Uncle. It is a business, and you are a liability. Just go, and take that old truck with you. It is an eyesore." I nodded slowly. I walked into the shed and grabbed my duffel bag. It was already packed. I had my medication, my toothbrush, and the file containing the conservation easement deed. I walked to my truck and threw the bag in the passenger seat. I started the engine, the old Ford roaring to life with a reliability Tyson would never understand. I rolled down the window as I drove past the porch. Tyson and Courtney were standing there admiring the white fence that glowed in the twilight. They looked like the kings of the world. Leaving already, Uncle Tyson shouted over the wind. "Yes," I said, my voice calm. I checked the forecast, Tyson. "It is going to rain hard tonight. Very hard. You might want to close the windows. That fresh paint needs to cure." Tyson waved me off. "Don't worry about us, old man. We have climate control. Just go. Enjoy the motel." I shifted the truck into drive. "Good luck with the rain," I whispered. I drove down the long driveway and out onto the main road. I didn't go to the Motel 6. I drove to the top of the ridge where there was a scenic overlook that faced the lake. I parked the truck and turned off the engine. I had a clear view of the cottage below. The lights were on, blazing from every window. It looked like a beacon of arrogance. I rolled down my window and let the humid air fill the cab. I could smell the rain coming. It was heavy, with ozone and moisture. I leaned back in my seat and waited. I wasn't going anywhere. I wanted to see the moment the sky opened up. I wanted to see the moment the water hit that fence. I wanted to see the moment their perfect white lie turned into a reeking, toxic reality. They wanted a surprise. They wanted an authentic local experience. Well, there is nothing more authentic than nature taking its course. I closed my eyes and listened to the first rumble of thunder rolling across the water. It sounded like justice. I sat in the cab of my truck on the ridge looking down at my property through a pair of high-powered binoculars I usually use to spot herons on the water. It was 10 in the morning on Saturday. The storm clouds were gathering thick and heavy, but the rain had not started yet. Below me, the scene looked like a commercial for a lifestyle brand that I could never afford. 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway, kicking up dust that settled on my freshly painted white fence. The doors opened, and a flock of beautiful people spilled out. They were loud, they were energetic, they were carrying ring lights and cases of champagne. These were the influencers Tyson had bet his life on, the people who were supposed to put his wellness retreat on the map. I watched as Tyson and Courtney greeted them. Courtney was wearing a long, flowing dress that matched the boho chic decor she had forced into my living room. She was handing out glasses of sparkling water with lemon wedges, acting the part of the gracious hostess. Tyson was shaking hands, pointing out the features of the property. He pointed to the lake. He pointed to the deck. And with a swell of pride that made my stomach turn, he pointed to the gleaming white fence that surrounded the perimeter. The guests oohed and ahed. They immediately pulled out their phones. I could see them posing against the fence, leaning on the rails, using my hard work as a backdrop for their digital vanity. From a distance, it looked perfect. The house was shining. The grounds were manicured. The guests were happy. Tyson looked like he had won the lottery. I could see him laughing, his head thrown back, confident that his gamble had paid off. He had kicked his uncle off the property, he had violated building codes, he had ignored every warning I gave him, and now he was reaping the rewards. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the world operated on appearances alone. But nature does not care about appearances. Nature cares about chemistry. And up on the ridge, I felt the first drop of rain hit the windshield of my truck. It was a heavy, cold drop, then another, and another. The sky turned a bruised charcoal color, and the wind picked up, whipping the lake into white caps. Down below, the party moved inside. I saw the lights flicker on in the living room. They were safe from the rain. They were cozy. They had their wine and their music and their open-concept floor plan. They had no idea that the white fence they had just been leaning on was about to undergo a transformation that no filter could fix. I rolled up my window and settled in. I had a thermos of coffee and a bag of trail mix. I wasn't going anywhere. The show was just starting. The rain came down in sheets, a true Georgia downpour that turned the red clay into soup. It hammered against the roof of my truck, a rhythmic drumming that usually lulled me to sleep. But today I was wide awake. I watched the clock on the dashboard. It had been raining for 2 hours. The humidity was spiking. The moisture was soaking into the wood of the fence, breaking down the latex barrier and activating the organic compounds I had mixed into the paint. Fish emulsion is a powerful fertilizer. It is made from the liquefied remains of fish. It is rich in nitrogen, and it smells like the bottom of a trawler that has been sitting in the sun for a week. Sulfur powder, when wet, smells like rotten eggs and volcanic gas. Combined, they create a scent profile that is physically aggressive. It doesn't just smell bad. It triggers a primal gag reflex. It smells like decomposition. It smells like danger. I couldn't smell it from the ridge, but I could see the effects. The front door of the cottage opened. One of the guests, a tall man in a linen suit, stepped out onto the porch, probably to smoke or watch the storm. He took one step, then stopped. He doubled over. He covered his nose and mouth with his hand and stumbled back inside, slamming the door. A few minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was Courtney. She stepped out looking frantic. She sniffed the air, and even from 300 yards away, I saw her recoil. She ran to the edge of the porch, looking around wildly, trying to find the source. Was it a dead animal? Was it a gas leak? She didn't know. She couldn't know that the source was the beautiful white fence that surrounded them on all sides like a toxic embrace. The smell would be seeping through the cracks in the windows. It would be drawn in by the air conditioning intake vents. It would be permeating the curtains and the rugs. I saw lights turning on in the upstairs bedrooms. Shadows moved frantically behind the blinds. They were trapped. Outside, the air was unbreathable. Inside, the smell was infiltrating every room. I imagined the scene. The influencers trying to cover their noses with silk scarves. The expensive dinner tasting like rotting fish. Tyson trying to explain that it was just a local agricultural phenomenon. But there is no explaining away the smell of death. Then I saw the first person run out, a woman in a sequined dress. She ran to the edge of the porch and vomited over the railing. The smell was making them physically ill. The chemical reaction was peaking. The heat from the house combined with the cold rain was creating a vapor cloud of stench that hugged the ground. It was a dome of misery. Tyson came out next. He was shouting into his phone, probably calling a plumber or the gas company. He was pacing back and forth on the porch, but he couldn't escape it. He was trapped in the prison he had paid me $50 to leave. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted delicious, but I knew the paint was only the first movement of the symphony. The second movement was about to begin, because when you have 12 people in a house with 3 bathrooms, and they have been drinking champagne and eating rich food, nature calls. And when nature calls, you need plumbing that works. Before I left the shed, I had made a small adjustment to the main outflow valve of the septic system. I hadn't broken it. I had simply closed it by 80%. It was a gate valve located in the crawl space, accessible only if you knew exactly where to look. By closing it, I had restricted the flow to a trickle. The system could handle one person flushing a toilet once an hour, but it could not handle a house full of guests showering, using the sinks, and flushing toilets simultaneously. Physics is a patient mistress. The pressure builds slowly, the pipes fill up, the water has nowhere to go, and because water seeks its own level, eventually it comes back. I watched through the binoculars as the chaos escalated. I saw a light turn on in the downstairs bathroom, then another in the kitchen, then the upstairs bath. Suddenly the front door flew open again. This time it wasn't because of the smell outside, it was because of what was happening inside. A group of guests spilled out onto the porch in the pouring rain. They were screaming. I couldn't hear the words, but body language is universal. They were pointing back at the house with horror. The backflow had started. I knew exactly what was happening. The toilets were overflowing, not with clean water, but with everything that had been flushed in the last 4 hours. The shower drains were gurgling up black sludge. The kitchen sink, where they had probably dumped their expensive catering, was backing up with grease and gray water. The house was literally rejecting them. Tyson ran out after them. He was soaked instantly. He was gesturing wildly, trying to get them back inside, but they wouldn't go. They preferred the stench of the rotting fish fence to the sewage catastrophe unfolding indoors. They were huddled on the porch, shivering, wet, and miserable. Their phones were out, but they weren't taking selfies. They were calling Ubers. They were calling taxis. They were trying to escape the wellness retreat from hell. I saw headlights. One of the guests ran to their SUV and started the engine. They didn't care about the mud. They didn't care about the deposit. They just wanted out. The car peeled out of the driveway, sliding in the mud, nearly hitting the fence before correcting and speeding away. Then the second SUV left. Then the third. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty of guests. Only Tyson and Courtney remained. They stood on the porch alone, surrounded by the smell of fish and the reality of a flooded house. The lights flickered and then went out. The main breaker must have tripped from the water damage. The house went dark. I lowered my binoculars. The rain drummed on. It was a complete rout. A total victory for the laws of physics and chemistry. Tyson had wanted to monetize my home. He had wanted to turn it into a machine for profit. But he forgot that a house is a system, and if you don't respect the engineer who built it, the system will fail you. I started my truck. I wasn't going down there tonight. There was nothing for me to do. The lesson had been delivered. I would spend the night at the Motel 6, just like Tyson suggested. I would sleep in a clean bed with working plumbing and breathable air. And tomorrow morning, when the sun came up, I would go down and reclaim what was mine. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving my nephew in the dark, surrounded by the mess he had made. The nightmare had begun for him, but for me, it felt like the first peaceful night I had in months. I pulled my truck up to the edge of the property at 8 in the morning. The air still hung heavy with the scent of sulfur and raw sewage, a toxic perfume that clung to the wet grass. The silence of the morning was broken only by the sound of frantic scrubbing. I walked toward the porch and found Tyson on his hands and knees. He was wearing yellow rubber gloves and scrubbing the floorboards with bleach, his face pale and covered in sweat. He looked up at me with wild eyes. They left Uncle. They all left at 3 a.m. They demanded refunds. They threatened to sue. "Look at this!" He shoved his phone in my face. The screen was bright with notifications from the rental platform. 1 star. The house smells like a rotting corpse. Sewage backed up into the shower. Worst experience of my life. Avoid at all costs. Tyson threw the phone down on a patio chair. "It is a disaster. I have negative reviews before we even officially launched. The algorithm is going to bury me." He stood up, stripping off the gloves. "But I can fix it. I just need to air it out. I need to get a plumber out here to snake the lines. The paint just reacted to the humidity right. It will fade. We can rebook for next week." He was manic, talking fast, trying to convince himself that this was just a hurdle. He didn't see the cliff he had already fallen off. I looked at the house. The front door was wide open, trying to vent the stench. Mud tracks covered the expensive rugs. The white fence was streaked with yellow runoff from the chemical reaction. It looked like a war zone. "You can't fix this with bleach, Tyson," I said calmly. "You broke the house." And the house fought back. Tyson glared at me. "Don't lecture me, old man. This is your fault somehow. I know you did something. I just don't know what yet. But when I find out, you are going to pay." He didn't get to finish his threat, because at that moment the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires filled the air. It wasn't a guest. It wasn't a plumber. It was a caravan. 3 white SUVs with the county seal on the doors rolled down the driveway, followed by a truck marked Environmental Protection Division. They parked in a line blocking Tyson's convertible. Men and women in uniforms stepped out carrying clipboards and testing equipment. They didn't look like they were here for a vacation. They looked like they were here for an execution. Tyson froze. "Who are these people?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I just leaned against the porch railing and watched as a tall man with a buzz cut and a badge on his belt walked up the steps. He ignored Tyson and looked straight at the puddle of water seeping from under the front door. "I am Inspector Davis from Code Enforcement," he announced, his voice flat and authoritative. "We received multiple anonymous complaints regarding unpermitted construction noise violations and the discharge of untreated sewage into a protected watershed." Tyson stepped forward, trying to summon his influencer charm. "Officer, there must be a mistake. We had a small plumbing issue last night, but it is under control. We are just doing some light renovations." Davis walked past him into the house. He didn't ask for permission. He stepped over the bleach bucket and looked at the wall Tyson had removed. He looked at the exposed wiring. He looked at the sewage bubbling up in the kitchen sink. He turned back to Tyson and shook his head. "Light renovations," he said. "You removed a load-bearing wall without a permit. You have modified the electrical system without an inspection. And judging by the smell, you have compromised the septic field, which is currently leaking effluent into the soil less than 50 feet from the lake. That is a federal environmental violation, son." Another officer walked up from the lake, holding a sample jar filled with murky water. "We have confirmed contamination in the littoral zone, Davis. Nitrogen levels are off the charts. It looks like chemical runoff combined with biological waste." Davis made a note on his clipboard. "That is a $10,000 fine for the EPA violation alone, plus $5,000 for the unpermitted structural work. I am issuing an immediate stop work order. You are to vacate the premises until the structure is deemed safe. And frankly, looking at that beam you cut, I am condemning this building effective immediately. It is not habitable." Tyson's face went from pale to gray. "Condemned? You can't do that. This is my property. I have rights. I have bookings. You can't just kick me out of my own house." Davis looked at him with zero sympathy. I can, and I just did. You have 1 hour to grab your personal effects and leave the premises. The power will be cut at noon to prevent an electrical fire. Tyson turned to me, desperate now. Uncle, tell him. Tell him we have lived here for 40 years. Tell him the system is old but fine. Tell him we can fix it. I looked at Davis. Officer, I said clearly, this man has no authority to fix anything. He doesn't know a joist from a jam. He ignored my warnings about the beam. He ignored my warnings about the septic capacity. He did this to himself. Tyson lunged at me, grabbing my shirt. You traitor! You called them, didn't you? You called the inspectors. I pushed his hands away. My grip was iron. I didn't call them, Tyson. I just made sure they knew where to look. Davis stepped between us. That is enough. Sir, I need to see proof of ownership. If you are the owner, you are liable for these fines. If you are not the owner, you are trespassing on a condemned site. Tyson scrambled for his briefcase, which was sitting on a dry patch of the porch. He pulled out the crumpled copy of his father's will. Here, he shouted, waving the paper. My father left me this land. I own 50%. I have the right to be here. I am the owner. Davis took the paper and looked at it. He frowned. He pulled out a tablet from his bag and tapped the screen a few times, accessing the county property records database. He scrolled down, looking at the digital file. He looked at the paper in his hand, then back at the screen. Then he looked at Tyson with a confused expression. Son, this document is irrelevant. This will was probated 20 years ago, but the deed was updated yesterday afternoon. Tyson blinked. Updated? What do you mean, updated? Davis turned the tablet around so Tyson could see the screen. According to the county registrar, the current fee simple owner of this parcel is the North Georgia Nature Conservancy. The land is designated as a protected conservation easement. There is a life estate provision for a Mr. Lucius Bennett, but there is no record of a Tyson Bennett on the title. In fact, since this is now conservation land, commercial activity is strictly prohibited. You are not just violating building codes, you are operating an illegal business on protected nonprofit land. Tyson looked at the screen. He read the words Nature Conservancy. He read the date. Yesterday. 4:55 p.m. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. You, he whispered, you gave it away. I smiled a genuine smile for the first time in days. I didn't give it away, Tyson. I protected it. I donated the development rights. It is a tax write-off for me and a permanent shield for the land. You can't sell it. You can't rent it. You can't even cut down a tree without a permit from the Conservancy. And since you are not on the deed and you are not the life tenant, you are officially trespassing on private conservation property. Davis took the tablet back. Well, that settles it. Mr. Bennett, he nodded to me. Since you are the life tenant, you are free to stay provided you don't enter the condemned structure until repairs are made. But this young man needs to leave. Now. Tyson looked around. The house was ruined. His guests were gone. His business was dead. And the land he had promised to the loan sharks didn't belong to him anymore. He had nothing. He had less than nothing because now he had the fines and the debts and no asset to cover them. He looked at me with pure hatred, but I saw the fear behind it. The loan sharks wouldn't care about zoning laws. They would care that he had lied to them. Get off my property, Tyson, I said, pointing to the road, and take your wife with you. The show is over. Courtney was sitting on the tailgate of their rented SUV, her makeup running in streaks down her face, holding her phone up like a shield. She had found the only spot in the yard where the smell of sewage wasn't overpowering, and she had hit the go live button. I leaned against the hood of my truck 10 yards away and watched the performance. She was sobbing loudly, framing her face perfectly in the morning light. Guys, you won't believe what is happening to us right now, she wailed into the screen. The corrupt local government is trying to seize our property. They are kicking us out of our own home because of some obscure environmental law. We are victims here. We just wanted to create a beautiful space for you guys, and now they are treating us like criminals. She pointed the camera at Inspector Davis, who was placing yellow caution tape across the front door. Look at them, she screamed. They are sealing our house. Please tag the mayor, tag the governor. We need help. We need a legal defense fund. Link in bio. I pulled out my own phone and opened the app to watch the stream. The viewer count was climbing rapidly, but the comments were not going the way she planned. People were angry, but not at the government. They were angry at her. I scrolled through the chat. Wait, isn't that the house where you made that old man sleep in a shed? One user asked. Yeah, I saw that video yesterday, another commented. You treated him like a servant. Is he okay? The internet never forgets. Courtney had documented her own cruelty for weeks, thinking it was content. Now it was evidence. A comment pinned to the top read, I looked up the property records. That land belongs to a nature conservancy. You guys are squatters. Stop grifting. Courtney saw the comments. Her face flushed red. She tried to pivot. No, you guys don't understand. Uncle Lucius is confused. He signed papers he didn't understand. We are protecting him. Liar, a user typed in all caps. We saw him painting the fence in the heat while you drank wine. We saw you throw away his records. You guys are monsters. Justice. For Lucius started trending in the chat. The tide had turned. She wasn't the victim. She was the villain, and the audience she had cultivated was tearing her apart piece by piece. She started blocking people, her fingers flying across the screen, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a spoon. The narrative had escaped her control. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hate, realizing that I wasn't just the old man in the background anymore. I was the reason her digital empire was burning. Inspector Davis walked over to the SUV. He was accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. Ma'am, put the phone down, Davis said, his voice cutting through her monologue. Courtney ignored him, talking faster to her audience. The police are harassing me now, guys. I am scared. Please send help. The deputy didn't have patience for influencers. He reached out and firmly took the phone from her hand, ending the stream mid-sentence. Hey, give that back, she shrieked, lunging for him. That is my property. You can't take my phone. I make my living on that phone. It is evidence, ma'am, Davis said calmly. You just broadcasted a confession of operating an illegal commercial enterprise on protected land. We also need the laptop I saw in the front seat. We have reason to believe it contains financial records related to the fraudulent bookings and the tax evasion your husband bragged about earlier. Courtney froze. Her laptop. Her entire life was on that hard drive. Her contacts, her banking information, her passwords. No, she whispered, backing away. You can't. I have rights. The deputy opened the car door and retrieved the silver laptop. It is being seized as part of a criminal investigation into environmental fraud and wire fraud, he stated, tagging it with an evidence sticker. You will get a receipt. If your lawyer can prove it is not relevant, you might get it back in 6 months. Until then, it stays in the evidence locker. Courtney collapsed against the side of the car, sliding down until she was sitting in the gravel. She looked small without her digital armor. She looked like a child who had been caught stealing candy. Only the candy was $1 million property and the punishment wasn't a timeout. She looked at Tyson, who was standing by the road arguing with the towing company that was hooking up his convertible. Tyson, do something, she screamed. They are taking everything. Tyson ignored her. He was staring at his own phone, which the police hadn't taken yet. His face was the color of ash. He walked over to me, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Uncle, he said, his voice shaking. Look at this. He held up the screen. It was an email from the rental platform. The subject line was in bold red letters, account termination notice. I read the text over his shoulder. Due to multiple reports of severe health hazards, fraudulent property representation, and violations of our community standards regarding illegal activity, your host account has been permanently suspended. Furthermore, due to the mass cancellations and the severity of the guest complaints, all funds currently held in escrow, roughly $50,000, have been frozen and will be used to process full refunds and compensation for the affected guests. You are permanently banned from the platform. Tyson dropped his hand. The phone hung by his side. $50,000, he whispered. That was the money. That was the money for the loan sharks. It is gone. Uncle, they took it all. I looked at him. He wasn't seeing the lake anymore. He wasn't seeing the white fence. He was seeing a clock ticking down to zero. The money he had promised to dangerous men had vanished into the ether, returned to the people he had tried to scam. He was exposed. He was broke. And he was standing on land he was legally barred from using to make a dime. I leaned back against my truck and crossed my arms. It looks like your business model just collapsed, Tyson, I said. You wanted to be a disruptor. Well, consider yourself disrupted. Now I suggest you start walking because that tow truck is leaving with your car, and I don't think your loan officer is going to accept an apology instead of cash. The lake was a sheet of glass, the water so still it reflected the sky like a mirror. I sat in my small aluminum fishing boat 50 yards off the shore holding a fishing rod I hadn't baited. I wasn't fishing for bass. I was watching the end of an empire. The air was cool and clean, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on my lawn. From my vantage point, I could see everything. The yellow caution tape wrapped around the porch columns. The police cruiser parked on the gravel, the tow truck dragging Tyson's convertible away like a broken toy. And then I saw him. Tyson ran down the slope from the house toward the dock. He was disheveled, his expensive suit stained with mud, his hair wild. He looked like a man who had been running from a fire only to find himself at the edge of a cliff. He stopped at the end of the dock, breathing hard, and looked out at me. He screamed, his voice carrying over the water, raw and desperate. "Lucius, get back here. You did this." I didn't answer immediately. I reeled in my lines slowly, the ratchet clicking rhythmically in the silence. I placed the rod in its holder and picked up the oars. I rowed toward the dock, my movements deliberate and calm. I wasn't in a rush. I wanted him to see me coming. I wanted him to see the face of the man he had tried to discard. When the boat bumped against the wooden pilings, Tyson dropped to his knees, grabbing the edge of the dock as if he wanted to tear it apart. "You ruined everything," he hissed, spittle flying from his mouth. "You set me up. You knew about the easement. You knew about the zoning. You let me spend every dime I had. You let me promise this house to people who will kill me. You are a monster." I tied the boat off and stepped onto the dock. I looked down at him. "I didn't set you up, Tyson," I said, my voice steady. "I tested you. I gave you every chance to show me respect. I gave you every chance to be honest. But instead of asking for help, you tried to steal from me. Instead of treating me like family, you treated me like an employee. You dug this hole with your own greed. I just handed you the shovel." Tyson stood up, his face twisted with rage. "It's my inheritance. It was supposed to be mine. My father owned half this land. Your father sold his half to me 20 years ago to pay off a gambling debt," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It wasn't the deed. It was a photocopy of the original agreement between Marcus and me, signed and dated. He sold it to save his own legs, just like you tried to do. But unlike you, he had the decency to be ashamed of it. He begged me not to tell you because he wanted you to respect him. I kept his secret for 2 decades. I let you believe you had a legacy because I wanted you to feel like you belonged here. But you didn't honor that legacy. You tried to monetize it." Tyson stared at the paper, his hands shaking. You knew all this time." "I knew," I said. "And I know what you did last week, Tyson." I pulled another document from my pocket. This one was a bank loan application. "I stopped by the bank this morning. The manager showed me this. It's a loan application for a second mortgage on this property, $200,000, dated 3 days ago. And right there at the bottom is my signature, or rather a very poor forgery of my signature." Tyson's eyes went wide. He backed away, shaking his head. "No, I didn't. That was just paperwork. I was going to pay it back." "That is bank fraud, Tyson," I said, stepping closer. "That is a federal crime. Attempting to encumber a property you don't own with a forged signature. The bank manager called the police an hour ago. That deputy isn't just here for the environmental violations. He's here for you." As if on cue, the deputy walked down the slope from the house. He was holding a pair of handcuffs. "Tyson Bennett," he called out, "I need you to step away from the water. You are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and forgery." Tyson looked at the deputy, then at me, then at the water. For a second, I thought he might jump. He looked like a trapped animal, but then his shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He held out his wrists, defeat etched into every line of his body. "Uncle," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please, they're going to kill me in prison. The loan sharks. They have people inside. Please, help me." I looked at him. I saw the fear. I saw the regret. But I also saw the man who had destroyed my wall, who had thrown away my records, who had treated me like garbage in my own home. "I can't help you, Tyson," I said softly. "You made a deal with the devil. Now you have to pay the bill." The deputy clicked the handcuffs onto Tyson's wrists. "Let's go, son," he said, guiding him up the dock. I watched them walk away, the metal of the handcuffs glinting in the sun. My nephew was gone. The threat was gone, but there was no joy in it, only the heavy silence of a family broken by greed. I turned back to the lake and watched a heron take flight, its wings beating against the air, free and unburdened. The silence that followed the departure of the police cruiser was heavy and suffocating. The flashing blue lights had faded around the bend of the gravel road, taking my nephew to a cell where he would finally have to face the consequences of his greed. I stood on the dock, my hands resting on the rough wood of the railing, looking at the empty space where Tyson had just been standing. For a moment I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the man he had become, but for the little boy he used to be. The boy I had taught to fish off this very dock. But that boy was gone, dead, and buried under layers of entitlement and malice. I turned slowly to face the house. Courtney was still standing on the shore. She looked like a statue of ruin. Her designer dress was splattered with mud. Her hair was a tangled mess from the wind, and her mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks, giving her the appearance of a weeping clown. She watched the police car disappear, and then she turned her gaze toward me. I expected screaming. I expected insults. I expected her to blame me for destroying her life just as Tyson had. But I underestimated her survival instinct. Courtney was a chameleon, and she knew exactly when to change her colors. As I walked down the length of the dock toward the shore, her face transformed. The rage and disgust she had worn like armor for the past week evaporated instantly, replaced by a look of wide-eyed terror and vulnerability. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands clasped together in front of her chest in a gesture of prayer. She took a step toward me, stumbling slightly as if her grief had made her weak. "Uncle Lucius," she whimpered, her voice trembling with a fragility that would have won an Academy Award. "Thank God you are still here. I was so scared. I didn't know what Tyson was doing. I swear to you, I had no idea he was forging signatures or talking to loan sharks. He lied to me too." I stopped 10 feet away from her, my face impassive. I watched her performance with the cold detachment of an engineer inspecting a faulty weld. She was trying to distance herself from the wreckage she had helped create. She was trying to rewrite history in real time. "He forced me, Lucius," she continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "He told me he owned the house. He told me everything was legal. He said if I didn't help him with the renovations, he would leave me. I was a victim of his manipulation, just like you. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to warn you, but I was terrified of him. You saw how he was. You saw how he treated you. Imagine living with that every day." She took another step closer, reaching out a hand as if to touch my arm. I took a step back, maintaining the distance. She flinched but recovered quickly, dropping her hand to her stomach. She rubbed her belly gently, a protective maternal gesture that seemed completely alien on her. "And there is something else," she whispered, lowering her eyes. "Something I haven't told anyone yet, not even Tyson, because I was afraid of how he would react. I am pregnant, Lucius. I am carrying your great nephew. A baby. A Bennett." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for mercy, hoping that the mention of blood and family would melt my resolve. "Please don't throw us out on the street. I have nowhere to go. My parents won't take me back. I have no money. I need a safe place for the baby, for your family. You are a good man, Lucius. I know you are. You wouldn't turn your back on an innocent child." I looked at her stomach flat beneath the silk of her dress. I looked at her eyes, searching for even a flicker of genuine truth. But all I saw was a desperate predator cornered and using the last weapon in her arsenal. She thought I was a sentimental old fool. She thought the mention of a baby would make me forget the insults, the cruelty, and the eviction attempts. She thought she could play me. I reached into the pocket of my work trousers and pulled out my smartphone. It was an older model, scratched and worn, but the microphone worked perfectly. I had installed a simple security app weeks ago, one that recorded audio when triggered by loud voices. It had been running constantly since they arrived, capturing every insult, every plot, every moment of their unguarded arrogance. I didn't say a word to her. I simply tapped the screen, scrolling through the file list until I found a recording dated 3 days prior. It was time-stamped at 11 p.m. the night they thought I was asleep in the shed. I turned the volume up to the maximum and held the phone out toward her. The sound of clinking glasses filled the air, followed by Courtney's voice, clear and sharp and dripping with venom. The recording began to play. "I cannot wait until that old man kicks the bucket," Courtney's voice said from the phone. "Seriously, Tyson, how long do people live these days? He is like a cockroach. I am so sick of pretending to be nice to him. I am sick of his smell. I am sick of his stories. I just want him gone so we can gut this place properly. Then came the sound of Tyson's laughter. Don't worry, babe. Stress kills. We will ramp up the pressure. He will have a stroke eventually. Then a third voice on the recording, a friend of hers she was on speakerphone with, asked a question. But what about kids' court? Do you want to raise a family out there in the sticks? Courtney's laugh on the recording was harsh and mocking. Kids. Are you joking? I am not ruining this body with a parasite. Tyson wants a legacy or whatever, but I am on birth control. I am just telling him we are trying to keep him motivated. If I ever get pregnant, I am handling it immediately. I am not dragging a screaming brat around my wellness retreat. I pressed stop. The silence that returned to the lakeshore was absolute. The birds had stopped singing, the wind had died down, even the water seemed to hold its breath. Courtney stood frozen, her hands still resting on her stomach. Her face had gone from a mask of sorrow to a mask of pure horror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking gray and sickly. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the phone in my hand as if it were a gun. I put the phone back in my pocket. You are not pregnant, Courtney. I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. You are not a victim, and you are definitely not family. You are a liar. You looked me in the eye every day and smiled while wishing for my death. You called me a cockroach. You called my home a dump. And now you want me to pity you because your meal ticket got arrested. She started to shake, trembling violently. That was just talk, she stammered. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. People say things they don't mean when they are stressed. Lucius, please. I didn't mean it, I repeated. You meant every word. You threw my wife's records into the rain. You forced me to sleep in a shed. You made me paint a fence in 90-degree heat. You tried to erase every trace of me from the land I poured my life into. And now you have the audacity to lie about a child that doesn't exist to save your own skin. I took a step forward and she took a step back, her heels sinking into the soft mud. The charade was over. The crocodile tears had dried up, leaving only the ugly truth underneath. This is a nature preserve now, I said, gesturing to the trees and the water. It is protected land. It is a sanctuary for wildlife. It is a home for things that are real and honest. And you, Courtney, are neither of those things. You are pollution. She looked around wildly, realizing for the first time that she was truly alone. Tyson was gone. Her car had been towed by the police as evidence of the illegal business operation. Her laptop and phone were in an evidence locker. She had no money, no ride, and no allies. But where am I supposed to go? She cried, her voice shrill and panicked. I can't walk to town. It is 10 miles. I am wearing heels. I pointed toward the main gate at the top of the driveway. I don't care where you go, I said, but you are not staying here. The park rangers patrol this area and they have a very low tolerance for trash dumping. If you are still on this property in 5 minutes, I am calling them to report a trespasser. And unlike me, they carry badges and handcuffs. She stared at me, her face twisting with hate. You are a cruel old man, she hissed. You are going to die alone in this house and no one will care. I smiled. I won't be alone, Courtney. I have my memories. I have my dignity. And I have the sunrise. That is more than you will ever have. Now start walking. She let out a scream of frustration, a primal sound of rage, and turned around. She began to stomp up the driveway, her heels slipping in the gravel, her expensive dress dragging in the dirt. She looked ridiculous and small, a petty tyrant, dethroned and exiled. I watched her go. I watched until she reached the main road and turned left toward the highway. I watched until she was just a speck in the distance. Only then did I turn back to my house. It was dirty. It was damaged. The wall was gone, and the smell of the fence still lingered faintly in the air. But it was mine. It was silent. And for the first time in weeks, it felt clean. I walked up the steps to the porch and sat in my rocking chair. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the wind in the trees. The invasive species had been removed. The healing could finally begin. 3 days after the arrest, the silence of the lakefront was broken again, but not by a party bus or a construction crew. It was a matte black sedan with tinted windows that rolled slowly down the driveway, crunching the gravel with a heavy, menacing weight. I was sitting on the porch in my rocking chair, nursing a cup of tea. Mr. Wallace was sitting beside me, reading the morning paper. We had been expecting this visit. Tyson's arrest record was public, and when a man owes $200,000 to the wrong kind of people, news travels faster than a brush fire. 2 men stepped out of the car. They were not wearing police uniforms. They were wearing expensive suits that looked out of place in the humid Georgia woods. One was tall and broad with a neck thick enough to stop a shovel. The other was shorter, wiry, and carried himself with the lethal grace of a coiled snake. They walked toward the house, scanning the property with eyes that were calculating value, not aesthetics. They looked at the damaged siding. They looked at the mud-stained fence. And then they stopped dead in their tracks at the foot of the porch stairs. Right there, planted firmly in the earth, was a new metal sign. It was green and white with the official seal of the North Georgia Nature Conservancy. It read, "Protected Habitat, Conservation Easement, No Commercial Activity, Trespassers will be prosecuted." The shorter man took off his sunglasses and stared at the sign. He looked up at the house, then at me. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer them a drink. I just rocked slowly back and forth, the wood creaking in the stillness. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. The wiry man stepped forward. "We are looking for Tyson Bennett. He listed this property as collateral for a private loan. We are here to assess the asset." I took a sip of my tea. "Tyson Bennett doesn't live here," I said, "and he doesn't own this property. He never did." The big man stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Listen, old man, we have a signed contract, a lien on the deed. If the kid doesn't pay, we take the house. That is how this works." Mr. Wallace folded his newspaper and placed it on his lap. "Actually, that is not how this works," he said, his voice dry and professional. "I am Mr. Bennett's attorney. If you check the county records, which I assume you didn't do before lending money to a desperate gambling addict, you will find that the title to this land is held by the Nature Conservancy. Mr. Lucius Bennett holds a life estate which is non-transferable and dissolves upon his death. There is no equity to seize. There is no asset to liquidate. This land is federally protected conservation territory. If you try to foreclose on it, you will be tied up in litigation with the Environmental Protection Agency for the next 50 years. The wiry man looked at Mr. Wallace, then back at the sign. He pulled a phone from his pocket and dialed a number. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. He put the phone on speaker and held it up. Tyson picked up on the first ring. The background noise sounded like a cheap motel room, the kind of place you go when you are out on bail and your wife has left you. "Hello." Tyson's voice was shaky, terrified. "Tyson, this is Mr. Tyson." Vargas, the wiry man, said, "We are standing at your lake house. There is a sign here that says it is a nature preserve. There is an old man and a lawyer telling us you don't own a single blade of grass here. You have 10 seconds to explain why you lied to us about our collateral." I heard Tyson gasp. No, that is a mistake," he stammered. "My uncle tricked me. He signed it away to spite me. But the house is still there. It is worth millions. You can fight it. You have lawyers, right? Just take the house. Kick him out." Vargas laughed, a cold sound that had no humor in it. "You want us to sue a nature conservancy, Tyson? You want us to fight the federal government for a house that has been condemned by the county? We saw the orange sticker on the door, Tyson. The house is worthless. The land is locked. You sold us air." "Please," Tyson begged, his voice cracking into a sob. "I can fix this. I just need time. I will get a job. I will pay you back. Just don't hurt me." Vargas looked at me. He looked at the peaceful lake. He looked at the solid, unmovable reality of the situation. He knew he had been played not by me, but by the incompetence of the man on the phone. "Tyson, you owe us $200,000 plus interest," he said softly. "You don't have a house. You don't have a business. You have 24 hours to find a solution. If you don't, well, you know we don't sue people, Tyson. We collect." He hung up the phone. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. Tyson was out there somewhere alone, broke and hunted. He had tried to feed me to the wolves, and now he was realizing he was the one wearing the meat suit. Vargas put his sunglasses back on. He looked at me with a grudging respect. "You played a hard game, old man," he said. "You torched the earth to save the ground." "I didn't torch anything," I replied. "I just returned it to nature. Nature is brutal to those who don't respect it." Vargas nodded. He signaled to the big man. "Let's go. We have to find the kid before he runs." They turned and walked back to the black sedan. They got in and drove away, the car disappearing up the winding road. They weren't coming back. There was no money here for them. No leverage, just trees, water, and an old man who had outsmarted them all. I looked at Mr. Wallace. He picked up his teacup and clinked it gently against mine. "Ironclad," he said with a small smile. "Ironclad," I agreed. We sat there for a long time watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The house behind us was damaged, yes. The walls were scarred, the plumbing was wrecked, and the smell of the fish emulsion still lingered faintly in the wood. But it was still standing. It was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, I knew it was safe. Tyson would never come back here. He couldn't. He had bigger problems now, problems that couldn't be solved with a sledgehammer or eviction notice. He had chosen his path. He had chosen the quick buck, the flash over substance, the lie over the truth, and that path had led him straight into the darkness. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and water. The air was theirs no longer. It belonged to the birds, the fish, and the memory of Esther. I was just the caretaker, and I had done my job. I had held the line. The sound of laughter is something that had been missing from this property for too long. For weeks, the air had been filled with the whine of power tools, the bass of party music, and the shrill demands of entitlement. But on this Saturday morning, the air was filled with the sound of 24th graders from the local elementary school running through the tall grass with butterfly nets and magnifying glasses. I sat on the porch step, no longer wearing a butler's uniform, but my own comfortable flannel shirt, watching them. A young ranger from the Nature Conservancy was leading the group, pointing out the nesting sites of the herons and explaining the importance of the wetlands filter system. It was exactly what Esther had always wanted. She used to tell me, "Lucius, we can't take this view with us when we go. We have to share it." She wanted to be a teacher, but life had other plans. Now, 10 years after she passed, her spirit was finally teaching again. The house behind me was no longer a stage for vanity. It was a classroom. The living room where Courtney had planned to put a neon sign was now filled with folding tables and microscopes. The kitchen where she had thrown away my dinner was being used to prepare peanut butter sandwiches for the kids. Mr. Henderson stood beside me, drinking coffee from a paper cup. "You did a good thing, Lucius," he said quietly. "Most people would have sold out. You gave back." I looked at the kids. One little boy was staring at the water, fascinated by a turtle sunning itself on a log. I didn't give back, I corrected him. I just put things back where they belonged. The house feels lighter now. The foundation feels settled. It knows it is safe. The restoration work had been grueling. After Tyson was dragged away, I had to hire a legitimate crew to come in and fix his mess. We had to shore up the roof where he had cut the beam. We had to rip out the cheap flooring he had glued down over the original hardwood. We had to sanitize the entire plumbing system. It cost me a significant portion of my savings, but every check I wrote felt like a penance. I was buying back the soul of my home. I walked down to the group of children. The little boy pointed at the turtle. "Is that your turtle, mister?" he asked, his eyes wide. I smiled, crouching down so I was eye level with him. "No, son," I said. "Nobody owns the turtle. And nobody owns the lake. We just borrow it for a little while. And if we are good, we leave it better than we found it. That is the job of an engineer and a human being." The boy nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson. It was a lesson my own nephew had never learned. Just then my phone rang in my pocket. The ringtone cut through the peaceful morning like a siren. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize with a correctional facility caller ID tag. I knew who it was. I had been expecting this call. I walked away from the children, moving to the far side of the porch where the shadows were long. I pressed answer. An automated voice spoke first, cold and mechanical. "This is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Fulton County Jail. To accept, press 1. I pressed 1. There was a click, a burst of static, and then a voice that sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. "Uncle Lucius, is that you?" It was Tyson, but the arrogance was gone. The influencer voice was gone. He sounded small, terrified, and broken. He sounded like he was huddled in a corner trying to make himself disappear. "I am here, Tyson," I said, my voice steady. "Uncle, please, you have to help me," he whispered urgently. "It is bad in here, really bad. They put me in general population. There are guys in here who know the people I owe money to. They look at me like I am food. I haven't slept in 3 days. I am scared, Uncle. I am really scared." I looked out at the lake where the sunlight was dancing on the water. I listened to his fear, and I felt the old instinct to protect him rise up, the instinct that had made me pay off his father's debts 20 years ago. But then I looked at the scar on the wall where the beam had been cut. I remembered the shed. I remembered the disrespect. That instinct was a weakness, and I had cut it out. "What do you want, Tyson?" I asked. "I need bail," he pleaded, his voice cracking. The judge set it at $50,000. My lawyer says if I can post 10%, I can get out pending trial. I just need $5,000, Uncle. Please, I know you have it. You have savings, you have a pension. Just $5,000. I will pay you back. I swear, once I get out, I will get a job. I will work construction. I will do anything. Just get me out of here before they kill me. $5,000. It was a small sum compared to the $200,000 he had tried to steal. It was a small sum compared to the value of the house he had tried to destroy. But it was the principle. He still thought of me as a bank. He still thought that his problems could be solved by my labor. I sighed, leaning against the freshly painted railing. Tyson, I said, I want to tell you where my money went. Do you remember that load-bearing wall you removed? The one I told you not to touch? Tyson paused, confused by the change of subject. What? Who cares about the wall? I am in jail. I care about the wall, Tyson, I continued. Because to fix the structural damage you caused, I had to hire a structural engineer and a crew of 4 men. We had to jack up the second floor, install a new LVL beam, and re-drywall the entire section. Then I had to pay a plumber $3,000 to pump out the septic tank and repair the gate valve because someone overloaded the system. Then I had to pay to replace the flooring you ruined. Uncle, what does this have to do with bail? He cried, desperate now. It has everything to do with it, I said, my voice hardening. The total cost of repairs for the damage you inflicted on my home came to exactly $18,400. That was my rainy day fund, Tyson. That was my emergency money. I spent every dime of it fixing what you broke. I don't have $5,000 for you. I don't have $500 for you. My money is in the walls. It is in the pipes. It is in the floorboards. You spent your bail money on a sledgehammer, Tyson. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. He finally understood. He hadn't just destroyed a house. He had destroyed his own safety net. He had smashed the piggy bank, and now that he needed it, there was nothing but dust. But, Uncle, he whimpered, you can't leave me here. They are going to hurt me. I looked at the children playing in the yard. They were safe. The land was safe. The house was safe. Only Tyson was in danger, and he had walked into that cage willingly. You wanted to be a builder, Tyson, I said. Well, you built this cell, brick by brick, lie by lie. Now you have to live in it. Consider this your rehabilitation. You have plenty of time to think about architecture now. Think about foundations. Think about how if the foundation is rotten, the whole house falls down. You were the rot Tyson, and I have renovated. Uncle, no, please don't hang up, he screamed. Lucius, please. Good luck, Tyson, I said. Keep your head down, and try not to make promises you can't keep. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear his tiny, tinny voice screaming my name. I pressed the red button ending the call. The silence returned instant and absolute. I stood there for a moment holding the phone looking at the black screen. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. The ledger was balanced. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked down the steps to the yard. The ranger waved at me. Mr. Bennett, we were just about to release the turtle. Do you want to do the honors? I walked over to the water's edge. The little boy handed me the turtle. Its shell was cool and rough, a perfect design of nature that had survived for millions of years without needing an update or a renovation. I leaned down and placed it gently in the water. It paddled away, disappearing into the cool, dark depths, returning to where it belonged. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my knees. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It didn't smell of fish emulsion. It didn't smell of sewage. It smelled of peace. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I was an old man with an empty bank account and a house full of strangers' children, but I felt richer than I had in years. I turned back to the house, my home. It was still standing, and so was I. It was 6 a.m. again, and the mist was rising off Lake Lanier just as it had every morning for the last 40 years. I sat in my wingback leather chair, the one Courtney had tried to throw in a dumpster, and took a sip of hot black coffee. The ceramic mug was warm in my hands, the steam curling up to tickle my nose. It was the same mug with the chipped rim, the same coffee, the same view. But everything felt different. The air was lighter. The heavy, suffocating weight of my nephew's ambition had finally lifted, leaving behind a silence so profound I could hear the wings of a dragonfly buzzing near the screen door. I looked around the living room. It wasn't perfect. There were still patches of fresh drywall where the structural supports had been replaced, and the floorboards near the kitchen still squeaked where the water damage had warped them slightly. But it was healing. The house was like a body that had survived a fever. It was scarred, but it was alive. The neon signs were gone. The beige throw pillows were gone. My jazz records were back on the shelf, cleaned and organized by year. The smell of fish emulsion and sewage had been replaced by the scent of lemon oil and old books. I watched the sun crest over the tree line, painting the water in shades of gold and fire. This was the moment I had fought for. This was the peace I had bought with my savings and my sanity. For a while, I wasn't sure if I would ever see it again. I wasn't sure if I would be sitting here or rotting in some state-run facility while strangers partied on my grave. But I was here. I was the last man standing. The coffee tasted better than it ever had before. It tasted like victory. The only sound was the scratching of a pen on paper. I had a notebook on my lap, and I was making a list of the birds I had seen that morning. A heron, 2 mallards, a red-tailed hawk. It was a simple task, a meaningless task to anyone else, but to me, it was the ultimate luxury. It meant I had the time to look. It meant I had the freedom to just be. I closed the notebook and set it on the side table. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the sun warm my face. I wasn't just an old man in a chair anymore. I was the guardian of this place, and I had proven that I was up to the task. Later that morning, Mr. Wallace stopped by. He didn't drive his car down the driveway because he respected the peace. He walked down the gravel path carrying a brown envelope tucked under his arm. He looked tired but satisfied, the look of a general who has just signed a favorable peace treaty. He climbed the porch steps slowly and sat in the rocking chair beside me. He declined the coffee I offered him, settling instead for a glass of ice water. He handed me the envelope. "It is done, Lucius," he said. The district attorney accepted the plea deal for Courtney. She rolled on Tyson immediately. She gave them everything: passwords, bank accounts, text messages. She claimed coercion and duress. The jury didn't fully buy it, but it was enough to keep her out of prison. I opened the envelope and pulled out a newspaper clipping Mr. Wallace had saved for me. It was from the local Gazette, not the front page, but the court blotter section. There was a small, grainy photo of Courtney. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She wasn't wearing makeup. She was wearing an orange safety vest and holding a trash picker. The caption read, "Local social media influencer sentenced to 500 hours of community service for environmental fraud." I read the article. Courtney had been convicted of being an accessory to fraud and environmental negligence. Her punishment wasn't jail time, which she would have turned into a sob story for her followers. It was labor. Specifically, she was assigned to the roadside cleanup crew for the county highway department. For the next year, she would be walking the ditches of Georgia, picking up fast food wrappers and cigarette butts in the heat and the rain. She would be doing the kind of invisible dirty work she had tried to force me to do. There was a poetic justice to it that made me smile. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be famous. Now she was visible to everyone who drove down Highway 19, a cautionary tale in neon orange. The article also mentioned that she had been hit with a hefty fine and was currently being sued by 3 credit card companies. Her influencer career was dead. No brand would touch her. She was canceled in the most absolute sense of the word. Mr. Wallace pointed to another document in the envelope. "And this is the final deed registration. The county approved the name change. It is official." I pulled out the certificate. It was heavy cream-colored paper with a gold seal. It certified that Lot 42 Lake Lanier was now officially designated as the Esther and Lucius Bennett Nature Preserve. It was irrevocable. It was permanent. My name and my wife's name were now woven into the legal fabric of the land itself. We weren't just owners anymore. We were the land. I ran my thumb over Esther's name. She would have loved this. She would have laughed at Courtney picking up trash, but she would have cried over the preserve. This was the legacy we never had children to give to. This was our mark on the world. A patch of green that would never be paved, never be sold, never be turned into a content house. Mr. Wallace stood up, patting my shoulder. "You did good, Lucius. You played a dangerous game, but you won. I am going to head back into town. Enjoy your view. You earned it." I watched him walk away back up the driveway. I was alone again, but I wasn't lonely. The house was full of memories and the woods were full of life. I picked up the newspaper clipping again and looked at Courtney's miserable face one last time. Then I folded it up and put it in my pocket. I didn't need to gloat. The universe had balanced the scales perfectly. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing I had painted myself. I looked out at the water shimmering in the midday sun. I looked directly at the invisible audience that had been following this story, the people who understand what it means to be underestimated. Listen to me closely. The world will tell you that when you get old, you become invisible. They will tell you that you should step aside, that you should give up your space, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps the young and hungry decide to throw your way. They will look at your gray hair and your slow walk and they will see weakness, they will see prey. But they are wrong. Age isn't weakness. Age is data. Age is a library of mistakes you didn't make and battles you survived. My nephew looked at me and saw a senile old man. He didn't see the engineer who knew how to calculate the breaking point of steel. He didn't see the husband who had protected his wife for 40 years. He didn't see the fighter. He thought he could take my peace because he thought I didn't have the energy to defend it. He thought he could push me because I was standing still. But he forgot that a mountain stands still for centuries, and it breaks anyone who tries to move it. Don't let them move you. Don't let them talk you out of your own life. Don't let them trade your dignity for their profit. If you built it, it is yours. If you earned it, it is yours. And if they come for it, you don't have to shout. You don't have to fight them with fists. You just have to be smarter. You have to be patient. And you have to be willing to let them walk into the trap they set for themselves. My name is Lucius Bennett. I am 72 years old. I live in a house that smells like lemon oil and old books on a piece of land that belongs to the birds. And I'm going to sit here and watch the sun go down. Never underestimate a man who just wants peace. Because when you take away his peace, you leave him with nothing but war. And trust me, you do not want to be on the other side of that battle. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And let me know in the comments if you would have used the fish paint or if you would have gone straight for the eviction notice. I will see you in the next video. Until then, protect your peace. This story reminds us that true power does not roar, it observes. Tyson and Courtney believed that youth and entitlement were enough to conquer experience, but they learned the hard way that you cannot build a future by disrespecting the past. Greed may offer a quick rise, but integrity provides the only lasting foundation. Lucius showed us that sometimes the strongest move isn't to fight back with noise, but to patiently let the consequences of someone's own actions become their punishment. Never mistake silence for surrender, and never underestimate the generation that poured the foundation you stand on. If you agree that dignity is not for sale and that peace is worth fighting for, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, was Lucius's biological warfare with the paint too harsh, or was it the perfect justice? Is 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 it the perfect justice?